Now, Mr. Speaker, this brings me to the cap on bankers' bonuses.
The Labour Party has come under fire after Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves announced it had no intention of changing Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng's scrapping of bankers' bonuses. The cap on bankers' bonuses was first introduced in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis to limit annual payouts to bankers. The objective of this was to make the financial system safer by reducing the kind of excessive risk-taking that led to the global financial crisis of 2008. So, what's the reasoning behind it?
The cap on bank bonuses was brought in the aftermath of the global financial crisis, and that was the right thing to do to rebuild the public finances. But that has gone now, and we don't have any intention of bringing that back.
So we go back to 2008. Can you talk to me a little bit about what it was like working in Number 10 during the financial crash?
Well, I've got very, very clear reflections on what happened then. And I had 2 points of view. One, I was working in Number 10, and secondly, I was representing some of the poorest people in the country, in my constituency. So in the constituency, there were people in fear of what was going to happen to them, worrying about whether they could go to the bank and if their money was still available to buy food for next week or clothes for the children or whatever. And in Number 10, we were dealing with this mega catastrophe about to happen where the whole economy might well have just simply collapsed because of the behaviour of people in the banking sector. Two things together gave me quite an interesting perspective. It was greed, and the work which was done afterwards established that. I think it was Adair Turner, who was running the Financial Services Authority, who said that, he said it in polite gentleman's language, but we can be kind of a bit more blunt, that it was greedy bankers grabbing bonuses and creating a system which fed their greed, but which left the whole of the banking sector fragile. Remember, they were lending money to people who couldn't afford to pay it back. And then they knew they couldn't afford to pay it back, those people, ordinary folk, working class people up and down the country and across the world. And then they were taking bonuses before the people had failed to pay back the money which they couldn't pay back in the first place. And I think it's important that we remember what happened, and especially now when this is a debate. I want to just say I was there, I saw it, and one of the last few people, I think, in Parliament who was actively involved at the time, and it's important we know about it.
There are lots of ways to get economic growth that don't involve deregulating banking and making it more risky. And, the bankers' bonus cap wasn't to lower the wages of bankers, although that's a arguably good thing, and you can do that via taxation as well. It was actually to make the system more stable, because what was found by regulators post the banking crash 15 years ago was that bankers were engaging in risky behaviour in order to try and get these bigger bonuses. Now, what's happened since that bonus cap came in is actually bankers' wages have gone up a little bit above what you would have expected, and because their bonus payments have gone down, so they're getting a more stable income and less reliant on bonuses, which the theory is that disincentivizes taking risky behavior, which contributed, it wasn't the sole reason, but contributed to the banking crash and the global financial crash we saw in 2007, 8 and 9. So that's why that was put in, and why other European countries have kept that sort of thing. It was brought in by the EU. George Osborne opposed it at the time. Labour supported it. In fact, just 3 months ago, when Jeremy Hunt announced he was getting rid of it, Rachel Reeves condemned him and said, this tells you everything you need to know about this government. In fact, Darren Jones went further, he's Reeves's deputy, and said that this shows Rishi Sunak answers to Liz Truss. She says jump, Sunak says how high, because it was Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng who originally talked about getting rid of the bankers' bonus caps.
The Chancellor is trying to claim that this statement today is fair. Yet we learn that of all the things that he could save from the wreckage of the kamikaze budget that he chooses to press ahead with is their plan to lift the cap on bankers' bonuses. At a time when he's urging wage restraint for everybody else, how can he remotely claim that this is fair?
Rachel Reeves overtly criticised the removal of the cap back in October and now seems to be U-turning on it. I think what it looks like is that Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, the Labour Party in general, are too scared to stand up to those people with deep pockets. I mean, what the SNP will always do is put the rights and the needs of the people of Scotland first. That's what we will do. That's what we're about. Our values are the same as Scottish values. And I don't see how you can say that you're putting people first if this only affects a very small percentage of the population who happen to have lots of money.
Well, that's what I'm curious about, because this was an EU directive in 2014 to ban bonuses. So do you think Labour are worried about the optics of regressing towards EU laws, or do you think it's more to do with Rachel Reeves becoming close with people in the city, particularly business leaders?
Yeah, I mean, Sir Victor Blank, who's a former chair of Lloyd's TSB, has been funding staff in Rachel Reeves's office to the tune of £175,000 in recent years. So there's quite a lot of money going into the Labour Party and to particular politicians on the front bench from the banking sector, private equity, the finance sector more widely. I think it's more to do with the collapse of their Green Prosperity Plan, which was, if you cast your mind back to 2021, what she announced in her conference speech, saying that an additional £28 billion of capital investment in our country, green transition for each and every year of this decade, driving growth, building homes, training people, creating jobs, all of that. And what we've seen in the last few months, really, last year to sort of 6 months, is it's no longer additional money. It's kind of including what the Tory government is spending as well. It's been delayed, possibly to the end of the Parliament. It's made conditional on the arbitrary fiscal rules they brought in. And now it's kind of, in recent interviews, been reduced to an ambition. We might never get there to 28 billion. So that was their thing that was going to drive growth. They've kind of scared themselves away from that because they can't seemingly make the case for investment generates growth. And so they're now kind of embracing this kind of deregulatory, kind of Nigel Lawson-esque model of growth, which is deregulate, big bang, let it all go. And that's inherently risky. I mean, it's really interesting to note what Gordon Brown said, who was Chancellor at the Chancellor just before the financial crash and then had taken over the reins as Prime Minister. And he said in 2010, just before that election, in the 1990s, the banks were coming to us saying, look, we don't want to be regulated. We need to be more free of regulation. We're being regulated too much. And he reflected, look, the truth was that globally and nationally, we should have been regulating them more. So I've learned from that. You don't listen to industry. This is his words. You don't listen to industry when they say this is good for us. You've got to talk about the whole public interest.
Now, in terms of trickle-down economics, how will this policy affect people in Aberdeen?
In terms of trickle-down economics doesn't work. It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. We've seen the increasing amounts of inequality that there is. There's hardly anyone works in banking in Aberdeen. There are a few people that work in oil and gas, for example, and get pretty hefty salaries as a result of that. But actually what we see in Aberdeen, in London, in places where there is that massive level of inequality, is that those who are at the bottom of the pile are even more disadvantaged because rents go up, the price of coffee in shops goes up, beer goes up, everything goes up because you've got a handful of people with those higher salaries, and that makes it even more difficult to live in places where there is significant inequality. If we look across the UK, inequality is becoming entrenched. It's increasing all of the time, and that's not what we want to see. We want to see a world, Scotland, where everybody can afford to live.
I've never seen a Rolls Royce in my constituency throwing money out the window for it to trickle down. And the truth is that when you look at the 1,000 richest people in our country, what's happened? They've increased their wealth by £500 billion while everybody else is struggling. And so it doesn't surprise me that people have gone on strike demanding better pay, especially with this crisis of the cost of living we've got at the moment. Trickle-down economics, the idea that the rich will somehow benevolently pass that money down to everybody else, is a nonsense. It's been tried, it's failed, we've got to move on.
This is one policy that's created a schism between the front bench and the back bench. So, how long do you think Labour MPs can stay put in the party if the front bench is deviating so far from what they purport to believe in?
Yeah, it took New Labour, several years in government before they got to this phase. If you think about, you go back to that period, in 97, 2001, all the good things of the New Labour government that people cite, Sure Start, devolution, Good Friday Agreement, minimum wage, all of that stuff happened in the first term. And then you had kind of like Iraq, top-up fees, 90 days detention, ID cards, foundation hospitals, the kind of marketisation of schools and hospitals. All of that bad stuff kind of dragged on as Labour kind of went down in the polls as well. But we seem to be starting off with that this time, and I think there will be resistance to it. I mean, and you've seen a fair bit of resistance over Gaza. You had, 8 or 9 people come off of the Labour front bench, basically say, I want, an immediate ceasefire and resign. And I think that's going to only intensify, and the Labour front bench is kind of flip-flopping all over the place, as you saw with like recognition of Palestine. It's just, I mean, the problem is with Labour at the moment, they just seem to be this completely kind of flaccid, and when I say Labour, I mean the Labour leadership, this kind of flaccid, amoral vacuum that's just filled with whatever they think will get them through the day with the least amount of kind of scrutiny or pressure from powerful people, and I think that's worrying, because they're just going to get buffeted by events. They're going to inherit the worst economic situation of any government, I think, probably since Attlee in 1945. And they're just so unprepared for it. You look at what the Attlee government was proposing then. It had a proper plan, not kind of amorphous missions about I want high growth and I want peace and love and less crime and all this sort of stuff. They had proper policies to deliver things, and they knew how they were going to do it, and they had the levers of the state to do it. Now I just look at the Labour leadership's policies and think this is so weak, and it's so the contrast is made worse because of the times we're in. I was pretty critical of New Labour even in '97 when they were saying some good things, that it wasn't good enough, but they inherited a growing economy. The economy was growing at 3%, I think, when Labour won in '97. They're going to inherit stagnant growth, possibly even we might have tipped into recession at that point. What's their plan? We've had the longest squeeze on living standards for ages. People are on their knees. People are paying more than ever in their mortgages and in their rents. There's a real crisis that is long lasting. That's not going to reduce overnight. What's their plan on any of this? Councils are collapsing around the country. The NHS has got the longest waiting lists. Schools have got more unqualified teachers than ever. Class sizes are going up. We're not going to be this sort of economic superpower if we're not training people, if we're half the workforce is on an NHS waiting list. It's really, really worrying. And their solution is, well, we've had some bankers do a report for us that says deregulate. I mean, it's not inspiring, is it?
The policy really does make it look like both parties are out of touch. It makes it look like the Labour Party, the Tories, everybody in that Westminster building, that they're not actually listening to people's concerns. They're not actually listening to the fact that the decisions that people are making is what to spend their last 50 pence on. And that's what matters. What matters is people being able to get to the end of the month. And it's very clear that neither the Labour Party nor the Tories are taking any meaningful action on this.
I had a look at what was happening in Britain in the banking sector, and I think your viewers might be quite astonished to find out there was one banker who was paid 63 million euros in a single year as a bonus, and there were 3,500, I think, who earned more than €1 million in a single year. And then they were saying, well, we need to lift the cap. But let me just say this: if you're an engineer, if you're a train driver, if you're a nurse or a consultant or a cleaner working for local government, you aren't getting rises. Never mind getting away with the stinking amount of money which some of these people have got their hands on.